Welcome. Has it started? No. Yeah, it has started. Oh, it's started. Right. Welcome to Let's Talk episode 3. Let's talk addiction today, and we're talking about gambling as well in that. And very very happy, always happy to have Karl. How are you?
Not too bad yourself.
Yeah, all right, all right. Just talking before we recorded. Busy, but purposeful. That's the right kind of busy, isn't it? Not
Yeah,
stressful. So,
always
doing things like this is always fun.
always have the right type of problems, as my guru says.
Yeah, you're my guru actually, Karl. So yeah. No, it's good to speak, and yeah, the purpose of these chats is to yeah, I think education. I think that like there's a lot of people raising awareness of mental health out there, but aren't I'm almost too afraid to say, here's someone with a bit of knowledge, here's some kind of ideas that people could work with. So we've done one about PTSD and we've done one about OCD, which I learned loads from, and that's it. I think that we don't want that if we're breaking down that stigma, these chats are going to be really important. So thank you for doing it.
Not a problem. Glad to help.
No, it's fantastic. So yeah, we'll get into it, and obviously we know each other quite well, so it's I feel quite relaxed about this. But in terms of addiction and your story, your journey, I always think the best question to ask first is when did you notice a difference? So you think something's up here, and what did it look like?
Um, that's a bit of a weird one because um, when you're gripped with an addiction or a compulsion, as I found that certain things, I think mine is more of a compulsion than an addiction. Um, Once you're in it, you don't actually realize you're in it until everything else around you starts unraveling. I had an addiction, shall we say, for want of a better word, but we'll explore the compulsion side of it later on. I think I've kind of had this since probably my mid to late teens.
Right.
And I can pinpoint things in my childhood which have caused that. I'd like to say it's not my it's my family. My mum and dad were great, and but I do think there's a few issues which have caused me problems there. But because I wasn't aware of them at the time, looking back now, hindsight being a wonderful thing, I believe they sort of programmed me to go the way I did.
Mm-hmm.
Which took the route of gambling, and it was always a very specific form of gambling. I was always very much, and always have been, on the fruit machines. Now I've never, where I've been to horse races with stag doos, I've been to Las Vegas, even I've been to casinos, but I think with me the addiction stroke compulsion has always been on a solitude level. I've always, when I've been away, I've been getting away from my issues, getting away from my problems, and it's been myself on my own. It's not when there's a social environment, friends going to a horse racing, friends going to the casino, as I say, even going with my sister, brother-in-law to Vegas that time, because there's other people there. It kind of, the compulsion side of it, where the urge to carry on gambling, which is really the ruination of me, or was the ruination of me. That happened only when I was on my own, when I didn't have other people reflecting my behavior back to me. I was kind of caught in a loop of an urge, which, as I found now, being a compulsive gambler means that whether you lose or whether you win, it's not about that. It's the actual act of taking place. It's the way that you can actually escape your problems. It's a kind of a very visceral form of procrastination where you're away. You literally are. I've read quite a lot on it because, as I'll explain later on, I'm one of these people who when I reached the nadir point, when I was at my lowest, and I think that's when our paths properly crossed. I wanted to know why I was doing it. I take my gambling actually isn't my problem. My gambling is the effect of the problems which I never faced. And even though I've now, through my own actions, through my actions with yourself, through in the last few months actually joining GA, and using all those components to keep my compulsion at bay, I now am trying to look at all the various other issues in my life which I didn't face over the past 35 years, maybe even longer. And I think that I will have to face up to those bit by bit to actually disassociate the compulsion. But I always think, as I've read reports, that once your brain is programmed to that way, it will be with you for the rest of your life. But I feel I now have accepted this demon. It's part of me. It's the yin and yang. It's the dark side. Everyone's got the shadow, etc., etc. But it's now I've pulled it out into the open, and it's there. I think one of the big things with addiction is that it's quite a shameful thing. It brings a lot of shame and guilt, not just because of the actions, but especially with gambling, it's the financial implications, how you there's a lot of money lost personally, and then that affects on family life, that affects on all the other things that finances do. But also now that I've looked into it a lot more and heard a lot more therapies from the months I've been at GA, it's not just about the money, it's about the time that's lost away from friends, family, loved ones. And I think that is, you can't get that back. Money comes, money goes. Yeah, you'd rather have it more than not have it. But I feel like, there's times I've lost with potentially my daughter or my friends or even myself doing things which I'm trying to do now at the grand old age of 50 this year. For the past 18 months, though, I have been trying to turn my life around with varying degrees of success. And I think, again, listening to the people that I've talked to now in the GA groups especially, I think that is kind of an overriding feeling. There's a feeling of the release once you get into a room, kind of similar to the peer-to-peer support that I think, but on a different sort of path. The peer-to-peer support which I've been involved with, Talk About It Mate, has been there's been like little bubbles of connection between people and various things, whereas it's like one whole torrent. Everyone is going the same way. And but again, I think both are great great advocates for recovery.
This is very powerful. Just to kind of give it back to you, you've obviously got great self awareness, and you even had when I first met you, you've got that very good self awareness, and like you've reflected on like how that's impacted you. And I think the isolation that comes through really strong when you're isolated. That was when you were vulnerable, and things like that. But yeah, you raised a good point, and you're in Gamblers Anonymous. Is that peer support can only go to a certain level. We're like an entry level thing, and then people go on to this more specific kind of supports that they go on to, and that I suppose if the topic is getting help, the process is that you've accepted behaviors and you've accepted to go back and address root causes. But part of getting help is connecting, isn't it, with people who I couldn't identify with addiction because I don't, is it how important is it to be with people who are next to you? Another man would say, yeah, I can get that.
Yeah, I think, well, from my own experience, again, it was, I'll go back sort of 18 months when I first sort of hit my rock bottom with the gambling. I reached out, I went through CBT, which was my first port of call. I then started looking at, that was kind of the mirror that was held up to me then to look at myself, where I was going, what I was doing, started taking responsibilities, stop blaming people for what is going wrong in my life. But then with as things then evolve, I obviously joined sort of the initial talk about it, make groups, which is the men only group, and we had a lot of success with that, the face-to-face meetings. And I was very strong. There was a period where, because I'd moved, I had so much validation and other things that I actually valued more. I changed the metrics of how I valued my life, which is quite an important shift when you start realizing these things. I was really making headways, but what kind of sideswiped me, apart from going through quite a personal, a big personal battle, was both with a relationship going sideways and a business which had, because of my time that had been wasted, I would say, at certain things, I'd lost some control of. But then the COVID pandemic came, and I was ending up living on my own, working on my own. We had the online stuff, but that hit me hard, and I actually relapsed then in that period. And that's when, after speaking to people, I realized that the peer-to-peer support and my own will and change things, it needed something extra.
Sounds like it,
yeah. And that's where I think that the GA came in then. And that's been really, it's kind of just fortified the sort of the cracks which were appearing. Even though I never went back to the levels that I was gambling at before, there was just sort of little peaks and troughs throughout the lockdown period of 2020. So by the end of the year, I knew I had to make some kind of positive change, and I'm glad I did, because, as you say, there is a unity, a fellowship there, because even though every person that talks at the meetings has their own individual story, there's a common theme running through it, and that there's a common feeling of, the same feelings of guilt, the same feelings of having to get over the kind of grieving period of things like the money and the time that you've lost, and come to an acceptance of that, and turning things around. And I find it quite fascinating that people, it's become so easy because it's online now. I mean, I potentially was doing 3-4 meetings a week sometimes. And although I haven't done it, I know there is a link that is basically a worldwide meeting online. So we've had people from Seattle, people from South Africa, people from Australia joining the Manchester GA meetings, and people from the Manchester ones, they'll go and join one in San Francisco and stuff like that. And it has been such an easy time to it. And I think that the communication side really does strengthen it, and it kind of reinforces people's feelings that you're not alone. And I think first and foremost, people need that hand to get out of the hole, that you're not alone. There is people there who've been through it. Some people that I've listened to the stories, and you just think, how have they got to where they are now?
Yeah. That's a powerful image about the hand, because, like, with any kind of support, you can't go all the way yourself. There needs to be something to meet you, because this is the thing about support. If people will get the support unless there is some kind of link there. And so I'm wondering with you, that you've got of GA, you knew of it already. That's there. What kind of forced your hand to so to speak? Because you mentioned you relapsed, but at what point did you say, like, this is enough? Enough is enough. When did the penny drop again that something had to be done?
Yeah, again, I knew myself again. The urges came back, and I had the time. All of a sudden you're in the house sort of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with some of the lockdown periods, and it was more, as I say, to the middle to the end of last year. If anything, though, I hadn't. The urges were still there, but I'd stopped, sort of, apart from odd blips here and there.
Yeah.
But I knew that I wanted to actually get more more of a sort of support on me. I felt, listening again with just bringing back the experiences of GA, there is people who've talked on there that are still keeping it quite private and slowly, letting it out with people, like, sharing with people there, because they just feel so bad themselves, and it's such a guilty thing. Whereas I think 18 months ago, I just thought the more people that know, the more I feel of it as a network. And I've recently listened to some of the videos done by a guy called Hilton, and he's amazing, both himself and his partner Laura Cleary, both recovering addicts. And he gives a very frank, one of the ones I watched recently, saying that he's actually proud to be an addict, because he's gone through the recovery, he's relapsed, and he's gone back into it, and he's using his addiction, or compulsion, shall we say, as a force for good. He's using that energy, the ability to focus constant, put quite a narrow-minded focus onto something which is bad, doing it onto something that is good. And also, as I found myself becoming a facilitator with Talk About It Mate, and involved more and more in the GA groups, is again that one of the things we touched on a few weeks ago with the loneliness, is you actually get more potentially from giving out than actually receiving. And I felt more at peace with myself when I've shared experiences, and people have taken comfort from that, or taken advice from that, or have shared a video, or shared an audio, and listened to other people with that. And I think that is a very, very strong, a strong support for the mental health that is behind all of the addiction process.
Yeah, like I just get this really strong sense that you've got your eyes open, and like, say not to blow smoke up your ass, but you've got a good blend of, you'll use your strong personal experiences. So we'll have a topic and you'll chip in something very, very, very personal, but you'll also follow it up with something that's like a managed bit of advice, or like a link, especially that one about addiction. That really was fantastic. And there's people from outside of our community who've messaged me privately about that video that I commented on, that you shared, because it obviously does strike home, and addiction is such a big issue. And like, that's why we're doing these chats. I'm not sitting here claiming to be an expert on any of this stuff. Like, each individual person is an expert on their own thing, their own story. And that's the thing. If you just gave out advice and stuff, but you balance it. And I think that's really important. But let's go. You did mention at the beginning about compulsion and things like that. This, I suppose, is the burning question. And tell me a little bit more. Like, what does it look like? How do you know? Like,
in what way? Sorry, is that mine?
Like you're saying, it's a compulsion rather than an addiction. So is it like, in terms of the behavior, do you just think like, I have to do it? Like it's. I suppose that is a personal question, and you feel free not to.
Well, it isn't. Yeah, I've kind of looked into it as well, though. The sort of the definition between a compulsion and an addiction is I think it's one of two things. One's the pleasure. A compulsion is something you do even though you don't derive pleasure from it.
Right.
So gambling as such, 9 times out of 10 you're going to lose. So there's no pleasure derived from that. Things like eating addiction, stuff like that. A lot of the other ones classed as addiction, which has got a physical sense to it, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, they all bring the body a high. Gambling itself does bring a high as such, but it's not potentially. A lot of people are urged to do it just because they are they're doing it to avoid other issues. They're not. It's to get away. I've read quite a few stories and listened to a few where people just gamble because they can't face up to their problems, and then they go into the feedback loop from hell because they gamble. It adds more problems to the problems, and then they gamble more, and it's always there. It's quite interesting though. Some people say that you always want that one big win. You win the lottery, you win this, that, and the other. But I remember recently looking into it, and there's one article that said, I think they did I think it was when New York papers, or America did a study and found, I think it was 60 to 70% of lottery winners have lost everything within 5 to 10 years. And it just because, the majority of people who win it are compulsive gambler. And I know myself from my own experience, it's not about the winning or the losing.
Right.
Somebody in one of the GA meetings actually said something very profound, which has stuck with me. It was one of the very first meetings I went to. Said, there isn't enough money for you to win. Because I know myself, I've won, and then I've wanted to win more, and I've ended up losing what I won, and then gone and lost more. So as opposed to being up, I'll sometimes even a lot, I've ended up down even more, and that's a compulsion, I think.
Because you're not accepting that this is enough. Like,
well, it becomes. I know myself that the money side of it. If you went to, say, the fruit machines or the fixed odds betting terminals, which have always been, as I say, my vice. I've never been, well, apart from then, the problem with during lockdown was the online, which I'd never touched before. But then all of a sudden, everything's online. So, I'll just have a click on that. And it becomes literally so easy. You're not thinking about, you're just thinking you're shoving bits of paper into a machine. You don't realize that, that's a birthday present, that's a weekend away, that's, there's actually a value associated to it, the actual finances side of it. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons with gambling, I think of all the addictions, has got probably the highest actual suicide rate, because it does have the burden of such guilt of everything around it, and the shame side of it. And because it is such an insular problem, it's not, I think they class it as a behavioral addiction. It's actually the only behavioral addiction which is classed as an addiction or a compulsion, because they don't actually class like overeating or addicted to shopping or sex or all those lot, but gambling actually is.
all these things are in plain sight as well. That's the thing. That's the angry and frustrating thing I find, that you meet other guys who are quite prominent in like promoting addiction and like overcoming addiction and gambling and stuff. But like you just have to see the advertising everywhere, and like you said, the ease of access, and it's just in your face, and it's like big part of the culture of like men and yeah that, and you brought up the elephant in the room there, which is the suicide rates, and I feel it's right there in everyone's face. So why we're not doing more? I know they've limited the fixed odds terminals, haven't they? But
Yeah.
like, but then again, like no one can go to the bookies anyway, really, or like. But then, like you said, they'll find another way of making it online. So what the obvious question is, how do you cope? How do you cope when it's so easy? What you've had to show a lot of strength, surely.
Well, yeah, I suppose one of the great things with looking into it, the first things that GA now have got, there is a lot of self-exclusion things. There's things now, banks now have put things in that you can't transfer money from your bank account to gambling websites. There's a thing called GamStop. There's a whole load of things, and literally, I think every GA meeting with one of the new members asks that, and they get the older, more established members put all the things there. So everything, you kind of put these things in place, and they are very good. If you self-exclude from them, you can't. I think you could if you wanted to, but the thing with it is, I think you've got a cooling off period. So you self-exclude. Once you press it, that's it, you're excluded. If you then wanted to go back gambling, you can't just do it. I think there's a 24, 48 hour period where you have to say, right, I want to do it, and you can't set it then. I think that's the good thing potentially about compulsion, because it is urge driven as opposed to a need basis. There is quite a lot of research going on about sort of surfing these urges, because urges actually really only last for quite a short period of time if you don't follow them up. So, and some of the research has been like they only last sort of 30 minutes to an hour. So if you can then get something more worthwhile to do for that half an hour to an hour, usually by that period, unless it's something really, really devastating happened to you, the urge will pass, and as will the. Whereas an addiction is a need for it. You really will need for it. And I think that's the other difference we said before about compulsion and addiction. A compulsion you do even though you know what you're doing is wrong, like with gambling a lot of the time. Whereas an addiction, most people, their addiction try and hide it and make excuses for it. Those were the two things when I looked up at the difference a while ago. I looked in, those are the two things I remembered. So someone who had an addiction would make excuses for why they did it. Whereas something like a compulsion, like say overeating, which is a compulsion, you don't want to do it, but you are just doing it. It's like, comfort eating, you shouldn't be doing it. And you're not really deriving masses of pleasure from it, because you end up making you feel sick. And as with the gambling, so I think a lot more in the GA, it is like we are classed as compulsive gamblers because we just have this urge to keep on and keep on and keep on, and we don't want to do it. That's why we're there.
This is really like interesting, I suppose, from the educational aspect.
Yeah.
I've known you for a while, but I've not learned this kind of stuff because really, it was you needed to go to the GA where they have this is part of the discussion. But I've learned the regulations and that changing focus is a really good coping
Oh
mechanism.
yeah,
Especially if you've got
absolutely.
compulsion, because it'll block it off, won't it?
Yeah. So all these things are put in. I mean, the great thing I think at the moment, although the last couple of meetings we've been to, a few of the members have actually raised, it's great at the moment because all bookies, casinos, all these various things where people would go to before as a social activity in inverted commas, they're all shut. So it was quite interesting, as I say, the last few meetings that a few people have said, we've got worries when this comes off because, we've had this like safeguard in place. But then again, you've got to take the bull by the horns. There is self-exclusion actually into bookies. You can say to the bookies, if I come in, please, you can self-exclude yourself. There's things like that. But again, I think that one of the great things I found with GA, and I would imagine this goes for all the Alcoholics Anonymous, Drug Addicts Anonymous, etc. Narcotics Anonymous, sorry, should I say, is the willingness of the other members to say, please, if you feel the urges, if you feel the addiction, if you feel something's wrong, reach out. There's a lot of, there is a lot of communication, not just with the meetings now, people phoning, texting each other, people making each other feel better. I think that is one thing, because I think especially with an addiction or a compulsion, that you kind of feel you have a very, very low esteem of yourself, and it's building yourself back up again. And I think that's one of the things I found with going to these meetings is that, there's no top and there's no bottom. Everyone's in it together. There's a cross section of people, of backgrounds, of ethnicities, of sex, of gender, and it's quite amazing that it does, from the high to the high to the low to the low. If you've got an addiction for something, you've got it. And I think the fellowship idea is really getting things together. And I know that one of the things that I go back, why I was so hesitant very much to start with GA, was I felt it was quite religiously based. I know reading some of the stuff before I actually got in there was a lot of mention of higher powers and God and stuff like that. And whilst I don't, I'd never mock other people's religions or beliefs, it's not for me. I've seen, I don't have that belief, and I didn't want it to be there, but I kind of think I use that as an excuse myself, not to sort of break the barrier. And in the end, I thought, right, well, let's go and see it. And it hasn't been mentioned at all. Well, some people, they use it. They, in their therapies, they will say, they've said a prayer, they've done this, they've done that. Others don't. Others are a lot more pragmatic. As myself, I kind of read up a lot more on sort of modern self-help, modern philosophers, etc., and take from what's out there. But it is basically saying you've got to look for a higher power, whether it be scientific, whether it be religious, whether it be your family, your kids, your parents, your best friend, your partner, whatever you derive hope from, that's what you should be striving towards. And I think the group area, like the peer-to-peer support or GA as such, that fellowship, that brotherhood, it just gives every sort of link a strength together in the chain. That's how
No,
I
I
think.
agree. This is absolute gold. All these things you're saying, like I'll go back and watch this and like really take stuff from it. Let's just say we've only got a couple of minutes left. Two things really. So, how post any links or anything under this when I post it, so people
Okay.
can go there. And two, with that in mind, then a lot of people never get asked how would you like to be helped. So for someone who's been through this, experienced this, if people have friends, family members, or who are dealing with something, what would be like your approach? Obviously, everyone is different, but like how some people can hinder instead of help, but unintentionally. How can I help a friend who might be in that situation, or what could I do?
This quite ties quite well into the topic from a few weeks ago. Is I think the problem with addiction and people who don't really understand the concept of it is that there's quite a bias and judgment placed on, it's kind of a person is weak because they're an addict. I think that's kind of been the stigma to it. And there's a lot of very strong people who have addictions, and they have addictions because they are so strong, because they don't want to face up potentially up to the problems which have affected them, especially childhood traumas and stuff from their earlier life, which is very formative, which they may have hidden away. It's made them the strong individual that they are today. But
Yeah,
then they've got an addiction because they've never really faced this issue and dealt with it and processed it and stuff like that. So sometimes they can hide that away, and in some tragic cases it causes them to take their own life because they feel they can't open up to other people. So I think certainly listening to people, if you think people are, of all the addictions, again, as I say, gambling is quite a secretive one.
yeah, yeah,
Everyone seems to, as I say, with all the therapies I've heard from Jay, I would say the majority of them are, no one knew, I did it in private, I kept it from everyone. Even though I think everyone found out, yeah, everyone kind of did know you were doing it,
yeah,
but you still tried to keep it away, and you didn't, until you really, really hit rock bottom, which sometimes is too late for people if they take extreme circumstances. You have to then want to help yourself. So I think listening to people, not being judgmental of people,
yeah.
um, trying to ease them to open up about what's going on, um, in a non-confrontational way, I would
Yeah,
say.
like direct, but not like harsh. Just yeah.
Yeah,
Some
yeah,
people
yeah,
hold back. They're not direct enough to ask the question to people because they're worried about it being confrontational. This is really important.
yeah. I would say, looking from that side, I mean, I didn't have that myself. And listening, as I say, to a lot of other people who've been in the same boat as me, you really have to want to do. Certain people have said they've relapsed because their parents, their partner, someone else has dragged them to GA and said, this is your last chance. And then they've relapsed because you have to get to a stage in your own mind to say, enough is enough. I want to change for myself. Because if you're changing for someone else, it'll never last. You can only do it for so long. And once you say, right, I'm going to change, I think that's it. So, again, helping as much as you can, listening to people, being non-judgmental with them, being aware, there is a lot of telltale signs for gamblers, mood changes, low self-esteem, being sort of secretive, especially around money. One of the big things, although I haven't done this, I know one of the big things has been let other people deal with your finances. So you can't get access to it, don't carry cash, things like that. These are all, along with the safeguards put in place digitally and in the real world so you physically can't, if you wanted to do, you couldn't then go and gamble, which I've put in place now and all the others have. It kind of does, as I said before, it stops your urge, it gives you that cooling off period, which is great. But yeah, there is I've got, you know, I have a really great relationship with my daughter now, who's 16, and we were watching the football the other day, and she just said to me, she's aware of my issues, and she's been great. She's been very supportive for her. You know, she's processed it very well and been non-judgmental about it as well, which is great. That's one of the weird things as well. When you come out, you feel like there is the shame and the guilt, and you do feel like you are going to be judged. But I found it was the other way around. I found, you know, people out a lot more accepting if you give them the chance. But the problem is getting past that barrier to overcome it. You're so ashamed and you're so guilty, and you don't want to open up about it. Whereas I found now, I'll talk to most people about it. I'm not scared of talking about it. It's something that is hopefully well and truly in my past. You know, I can never say never. That's one of the things. But I've got these things in place. I'm looking at my own self-awareness. I'm keeping going to the various meetings. I'm keeping the fellowship and friendships around me. So that's the way I would move forward. But yeah, going back to my daughter, she just said, watching the football, she said, I never realized there were so many adverts with gambling on. And it's every, like now, you know, when I was growing up, it was all the cigarette adverts, and they were throwing there, and it you know, it is potentially a mental health catastrophe, especially with the lockdown. There's so many people, and again, going back to figures, I know that I think GA did a study, and there is only a fraction of gamblers actually seeking help. It is just the tip of the iceberg there.
It's still people that aren't known, isn't it? And I suppose this is a good place to end, but I think what I'll take away is a lot of inspiration. Yeah, be more like your daughter. She just called it, and she's very accepting, and that's that non-judgmental, non-judgmental attitude is so helpful. Yeah, Karl, that was brilliant. Like, I
Hey,
know we know
man.
each other well, but specifically, like, loads of really, really important points. So just want to thank you for taking the time to do that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, if you post anything underneath, or if you've got anything that is useful in that area, please send it our way. And it's been an absolute pleasure to do this, mate.
Not a problem. I'm glad that, you know, you were there for me when I started this journey, and you've always been there helping me out. So, you know, I get now what I give back.
Yeah, no, and that's always been the way with you. And I think with you very early on, it was you were like, these are where my issues come from. And then it got to a stage where it was like, I think this has all been a journey for you to get to GA, and then finally, yeah. So it's really great to see that. So yeah, you're a brilliant advocate for other men in this position. So here
Yeah.
you are. Thank you very
Well, as I
much.
say, if anyone wants to contact me, I'll talk to anyone and put them in the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'll just
Have a,
that and have a great day.
have a great